So you're about to interview somebody and you need questions, but the challenge is the person you're about to interview is interviewed all the time and you want unique questions that are relevant to your audience. Here's how I solve that problem using AI. Okay, here's my challenge. I'm about to interview Joe Pulizzi. Joe Pulizzi is someone who is well known in the marketing area, and he also is someone who I know very well. So questions don't come that easy for me because I talk to Joe a lot. I watch Joe's podcast. I'm familiar with Joe, but my audience may not be. And the other thing is, Joe's on lots of podcasts. Joe gets interviewed a lot. Joe creates a lot of content. So how do I ask a question to Joe when I interview Joe that hasn't been asked 100 times before, or that won't be the same as the last interview Joe did? So I'm about to have Joe on my podcast, and I'm trying to figure out where are the gaps? Where can I find questions to ask Joe that are unique to our conversation, that are relevant to my audience, which is mostly marketers? So I went to Perplexity to see how to do that. So here's my screen. I've written the question elsewhere, so I'm going to paste it here, and I'll explain what I said to Perplexity. So I am a lead judge. That part is because I want Perplexity to do some research into who I am and understand where I'm coming from with the questions. I'm also going to tell it I'm interviewing Joe Pulizzi on my podcast. That gives us some context. And I also want to let them know that Joe's a friend and also featured in my book, Cash. That lets them know that there are some commonalities between me and Joe and that we may want to reference some things from Cash. Joe has his own podcast and appears on many others. Look for questions Joe has been asked in recent podcasts. Help me find new and original questions that would be of interest to my audience of marketers. Again, because I've pointed out who I am, it'll be able to understand who my audience is. It has a data point of me, of the book, of Joe, to figure out who the audience is. Now, in this case, I'm going to make sure that it does deep research. I don't have to use this on every part of this, but I'm going to use deep research to make sure it understands who I am, who Joe is, what the book is about, and my audience, marketers. So let's see what we get here. So it's going to do some research, and it's going to take a while because it's going to research me. It's going to look up a lead judge. It's going to find some recent podcasts from Joe. It's going to find some of my information. So I may skip forward a few moments to show you what's going on, but the best part is it's reasoning here. It's looking at Joe Pulizzi. It's looking at two more pieces of information. It's looking at all these different places. It's going to Apple. It's going to Joe Pulizzi's podcast, and it's continuing to research. It found some discussions. Okay, so let's jump forward to see what we have next. Okay, it's done some research now, and it has many steps. I want to show you some of the thought process that was involved in Perplexity's deep research thought process. So one of the first things is it says it's found a large range of podcast episodes featuring Joe Pulizzi. Some of them had questions that were asked during interviews. However, to develop new and original questions is what I asked for. It wants to gather some more information. So let's see what the next thoughts were. Let's skip down to let me analyze the query a lead judge wants me to help prepare for an interview. So it's thinking about what the goal was that I asked it, which was to find original questions. Let's go a bit further. Let's see, it's got key information on Joe. It knows he's a founder of Content Marketing Institute. It knows about the books he's authored. Let's go a bit further. 4 secret questions. Okay, so it realized there's an episode, and I think that sounds like one of my episodes. So it may be realizing, yes, it says that I was one of the experts who asked a question about content marketing to Joe on an episode from October 2024. So it knows that I already had some interaction with Joe. So it understands that and it's going to hopefully avoid some of those questions. So it's going to now look to develop original questions, moving beyond traditional metrics. It's going through questions. So the point is, it's doing a lot of thought here, and it's looking through things that it's seen before, questions that it's asked before, asking about content entrepreneurs, which is one of Joe's things, next phase of Joe's career, lots of things here. So now that it's done all of that, it's going to create a final report of questions that I can use to talk to Joe. Now, here's the thing. It gives me a report, which is a lot. It's understanding what Joe's focus is, what Joe's been doing, some content strategy questions, some just some topics that are cross intersections between Joe and I that could be good questions. But this isn't in a form that makes it easy for me to ask questions of Joe while we're having a conversation. So the next step for me is I'm going to ask a follow-up question. Now, please take that information and format it so that I can read it during my interview. The format, this is how I like to do it. The format should be, I like this. It'll be setup, which is background info, and question number. All right. And let's see how that goes. Now, once it does this, there's going to be some questions that I like, some questions I don't like, some that may not make sense. And I'll put the human part in to make sure that, one, it's relatable to Joe and I, to two, that it makes sure that it's good for my audience, that it's a question my audience may want to hear. And it still may pick up questions that are general that my audience has already heard many times from me or Joe. So the goal here is to have a few questions that are new, original, intriguing, make for good conversation, and are also easy for me to read and understand. I don't want to ask Joe a question that I don't understand. So unless it's something I want to ask as a question to get understanding from Joe. So let's see what we get. Question one, wait, back up. So the setup. Your content tilt concept has been foundational for marketers, but today's landscape has changed dramatically and AI has increased content production across industries. Here's the question. How should marketers rethink? See, this is what I need. It has a setup so we can have a regular conversation, and it has the question. Let's see how many questions we have here. 3, 4, 5, 6. So now we have a list of questions and the setup. And what I would do from that, I would go through that and narrow it down to the ones I want. Now, I could at this point take it off into a Word or Google Doc that I'll use for the interview, or I could go through this conversation and continue and say, I don't like questions 2, 5, 8, and 9. Bring it down to just 4 questions and make sure that we talk about content marketing and AI. All right. So now I know that in my particular podcast, 30 minutes, I'll be good to get into 4 questions because each question will lead to other conversation and it will easily fill up 30 minutes. I used to do 8 questions. Now I know 4 is enough because we're going to have a conversation. I'm going to listen. I'm going to ask more questions. So this is just a starting point for me. And so let's see where we get next when it gives me some other answers. Okay, now it's revised my questions. Let's see what we have here. Okay, now we have 4 questions. We have a setup, content tilt, and how should marketers rethink their differentiation strategies. Another setup, question, setup, question, setup, question, setup, question. Okay, so there you have it. I used AI to find questions that I hope are unique to my audience. Again, the human has to be in the loop. So when it gives me these questions, it may give me 10 questions. I may find 4 or 5 that are amazing, that are unique, that are new. I could add an additional step in here if I wasn't doing deep research, which I could always turn the deep research off. In fact, I should have a couple of steps back to save some time. And so also, if I'm paying for the account, save some deep research tokens. But the point is, I could have also given it a persona for my audience. I could have given it more about me or Joe. In this case, I have a lot of content online about myself. I have my content. I have my book. Joe has podcasts. I have podcasts. Joe has books. There's lots of content about us. But if you don't have much content about yourself or your audience online, you want to feed your LLM, whether it be Perplexity or ChatGPT, you want to feed it some information about yourself. If it can't research, if it can't find it online, you want to feed it some kind of document that says, this is who I am, this is who my audience is, and that way it can tailor those questions to you and your audience, and then you'll have a list of follow-up questions. Now, I will share this with you as well. After I did all of that, here are the questions I'm about to ask Joe in a few minutes when I interview him on the Business of Marketing podcast. Here you go. So I always have my intro to my show. This is kind of a behind the scenes of my podcast, but here's my result. I have a setup, which I've customized a bit, and there's my question. I have a setup and a question, setup, question. So here you have what I'll be using as I interview Joe. And if you find this episode of the Business of Marketing podcast with Joe Pulizzi and I from 2025, you'll see me following these questions. And hopefully this will have a new, refreshing take on the conversation that Joe and I have, because we've talked before and we talk via email all the time, but I wanted questions that are new and valuable to my audience. And this has been a way to help me do that. All right. So there you have it. That was my methodology of using Perplexity AI to develop questions that are unique and new and hopefully very valuable to my audience. Given now, Joe and I talk from time to time, so it's hard for me to think up new things that I haven't already talked to Joe about, but the focus is on the audience. So if you look up the Business of Marketing podcast for a 2025 conversation of Joe and I, then you'll find me using these questions and you'll be able to follow along and see, oh, okay, this is how Lee had these questions. I'll admit, all of my questions are not extemporaneous. Some will be, but some of them have been planned to make sure that my questions are unique to this conversation, not ones you've heard over and over in other interviews that I've done or that Joe's done. All right. So I hope this is helpful for you in helping you create unique questions targeted to your audience using AI.